Welcome everyone to our Global Read webinar series. Today we have the pleasure of talking to Jennifer Nadel, one of the authors of the book We, a Manifesto for Women Everywhere. This Global Read is being facilitated by Anu Mula from the Board of Trustees of the Charter for Compassion. Truly grateful to have you both here. And with that, Anu, I'll let you take the reins. If anyone has any questions, please post them on the chat. And we are also going live on Facebook, as you know. So if people on Facebook are watching us, you're also welcome to post questions on the comments and we'll bring them up at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felipe, and thank you, Jennifer, for being here today. It's such a pleasure to be in this space with you again. For those of you who are watching, we are grateful to Jennifer for having played such a big role at the Charter for Compassion banquet dinner at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago in August. And we're honored to have her here today to explore a little bit more about her wonderful book that I have here. And just before we do that, I have a small introduction prepared to introduce Jennifer to our wonderful viewers here today. And while I do that, Jennifer, I just want to say that I'm sure what I have might not do justice to all the incredible work that you are doing and have done. So please feel free to step in at any point. So here goes. Jennifer is not only a transformational leader, but an award-winning journalist, international speaker, and best-selling author. She's also a qualified barrister, political and communications strategist, and commentator, and currently leads the UK think tank Compassion in Politics and is the executive chair of the Global Compassion Coalition. Jennifer has reported from around the world for the BBC, Channel 4 News, and ITN. And as ITV's Home Affairs editor, she was one of the UK's most senior female television correspondents and is renowned for her investigative reporting and impactful journalism. She speaks widely on compassion, activism, and women's rights, and runs workshops on inner and outer compassionate change for individuals and organizations. Her most recent book, titled How Compassion Can Transform Our Politics, Economy, and Society, co-edited with Matt Hawkins, is a collection of interdisciplinary essays and has been hailed as a guide to creating a more compassionate world. According to her website, she is currently writing her 5th book on living a compassionate life. And we are here today to speak of her Sunday Times bestseller, We, a Manifesto for Women Everywhere, co-authored with her longtime friend, the lovely Gillian Anderson. And the book has been widely acclaimed as an uplifting and practical manual for creating change in women's lives, with 9 universal principles that help to confront life's inevitable emotional and spiritual challenges. And I'd just like to ask if Jennifer would like to add anything before we get into our dialogue today.
That's so kind. No, actually, there's one thing I want to add, which is, it's so easy to look at all the material things we do, but the bit that gets left out of anyone's profile is the darkness, the bits in between, the messy bits, and I've suffered also from severe depression. I've been hospitalized with depression. So I just think these CVs, they make us sound so shiny and great, but it's actually the most interesting bits of people are usually the bits where we've broken open. So I just want to say they exist too.
Absolutely. That's so beautifully put, Jennifer. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I think this wonderful book really speaks to the truth that you've just exhibited for us today. And just to get into a few questions about that, and I think you've set us off to such a great start. And anyone here who has read this phenomenal book, I'm sure joins me in making this statement that there is so much beautiful insight, if I can call it that, into how you and Gillian both came to embody the 9 principles, or the 9 we principles, as we call them, in your respective journeys. And I just want to say that while I was reading the book, what kept coming back to me is the usage of the word manifesto. And in the beginning, I was wondering why it was called that. But by the time I reached the end of the book, it was so clear. And I think more than anything else, I absolutely love the fact that it is titled We. And upon my research, I found that you and Gillian have both been quoted as saying that you chose the title to be We as an antidote to the me first culture. And I think my first question for you really is, could you share maybe just a little bit more about why you chose to write this book, and maybe what the process was of really coming up with the 9 principles that you and Gillian have shared in the book?
Absolutely. And just first to pick up on your highlighting the word manifesto, it is called a manifesto for women everywhere. And when we took that title of the publisher, they were like, people don't want a manifesto. We don't need a manifesto. And of course, as events have unfolded, we can see how badly women, this was written pre the Me Too movement, how hungry all of us are for a manifesto and a way for getting out. And what's different about the manifesto that we chose is that it's about our inner values as well as about our outer actions. The patriarchal use of the word manifesto is often about, the things we're going to do out there. But this manifesto is really about the internal work that needs to accompany it if we are to make a difference in this life. And the way the book came about really was just the realization that we have so much in this world, but suffering persists, and avoidable suffering persists. We have hundreds and millions of women and children going to bed hungry each night, and yet we have women in wealthy countries trying to restrict their diet and their consumption because they're worried about obesity. We have women dying from childbirth, from simple interventions that we in the West have and many across the world don't have access to, while we spend money on plastic surgery and trying to make our faces fit whatever the airbrush norm we're given by our culture is. So it was really about, we all know that it's wrong and we all know that it's crazy the way that we're doing it. So how can we really come together as women and insist upon a different way of doing things? And, I think for both Gillian and myself, the way we look at the world and the way we look at this work isn't compartmentalized, but so often we compartmentalize politics, we compartmentalize psychology, we compartmentalize spirituality, but all of them are intimately connected. But if you go to a bookshop or you go to a college or a school or a university, you will see these things in their separate silos. And what we really need to do is we need to integrate spirituality into every aspect of our lives, psychology, behavior, as well as the consequences of our actions. So it was really like, how can we bring together those 3 essential elements in one place? And I'll let you get a word in a minute. Sorry, once you get me going, I can't stop.
Please.
And the other thing we really felt was that the self-help movement has kind of been co-opted and commodified, and so it kind of takes a dose of spirituality and says, well, if you do these things, then you'll be able to have the life of your dreams, meet the partner of your dreams, have the, wealth of your dreams. And that is not what life's about. We know that wealth and privilege does not equal happiness. We know also that we need a certain amount of material assets in order to be able to survive in this world, but we know that those aren't the things that buy us really deep spiritual nourishment. So rather than having spirituality co-opted into and turned into a form of consumerism, we think it should be what it is, which is a revolutionary way to change how we all approach life so that we can all feel more fulfilled and more happy.
Oh, absolutely agreed. And I think for me personally, I really love what you've just said at the end of your wonderful answer there, is that there really is a need to understand all of these movements, which are very much at the forefront of hot topics, as we can call them today, but there is a lack of I think, a real authenticity and honesty in that. And I think perhaps that is where we are hitting so many roadblocks in terms of really making that progress with internal transformation that can affect our outer vision of any kind of a compassionate way of living. And I think for me, again, personally, reading through the principles, there were so many that stuck out, but I personally really resonated with the first principle of honesty. And I think just going back to the word authenticity, it has to be said that one of the most interesting things I felt as a reader, and I'm not sure if others did, I'm assuming they did too, is that in each of the principles, there is so much of a personal sharing that we get insight into. And for those who haven't read the book, just to give you a little bit of context, in each of the principles, we have small paragraphs, and sometimes they're short, but very meaningful, and sometimes they're longer, with different experiences in Gillian and Jennifer's lives that they speak to in terms of the principles. And I think for me as a reader, that is really what gave me so much deeper insight into understanding those principles. So I think just going off of what you've said in terms of the spiritual transformation as well, a big thing that I kept wondering while I was reading the book is that, would you say that, and I want to preface this by saying that, of course, so much of this is your own personal breakthrough and the courage that you and Gillian have both really taken on to put that out there into the world for others to learn from. And I think for me, what I'm really wondering, and what I'd love to learn a little more about in terms of your writing process, was that, of course, it is one thing to really feel our breakthroughs and share them with our inner circle and our personal group of individuals that we have in our lives. But it is another to bare your soul, so to speak, to the world and actually put pen to paper about those transformations. So I think what I'm trying to ask here is, would you say that in the process of writing about your reflections of your own transformations, perhaps you had a transformative journey through that process of writing and all that it entailed?
That's such a perceptive question. Thank you for that. So yes, I didn't want to talk about myself, and I know Gillian didn't want to either, but we felt we had to share some of our own personal journey, because, as you say, this book is about intimacy. It's about not lying about who we are. It's about being authentic, showing up in the messy, complicated way that humans really are, not the airbrushed kind of photoshopped way. So it was really difficult. And, I'd been trained as a barrister and then as a journalist. And, my training was, I don't become the story. And in addition to that, I grew up in a household, quite an old-fashioned household, where you didn't talk about yourself. Who wants to know about your business? And don't wash your personal laundry in public. So I had I guess they were shame-based voices saying, don't admit to anyone, the depths of your pain, the depths of your despair. Don't say that in public. But we felt it would be hypocritical to write about these topics if we didn't also share our own experience of what it's like to be in despair and to feel like you can't go on. So I found it terrifying. I felt like when the book was published, I felt like I was walking down the high street without any clothes on. I felt so exposed. I felt so vulnerable. But it's really post-publication that it's really healed me, because I've got nothing left to fear. Once we say it all out loud, we're not hiding anything. There are no more secrets left. And one of the things that I found most heartening from publishing this book is that other people can relate. The people that in the book that people most relate to are, they find the tools helpful, and it's great to have an idea of, the mechanics of how we can create behavioral change and improve our self-esteem and do those things. But that journey starts with identification. It starts with me too. It starts with, oh yeah, I felt like that. So the people that we get most feedback from are those who relate to what we've shown of our own personal journeys. So it kind of felt a bit like aggrandizing. Who wants to hear about that messy stuff? But you know, it's been upended. That's always what happens in this life, isn't it? What we think we know gets turned on its head and we discover how little we know.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for answering that, because I know that's a bit of a personal one, but I cannot agree more. And I think for me as a facilitator of compassion-based education, and one of the things that we always speak about in our trainings is this idea of being able to deeply cultivate our common humanity. And how does that happen? And the biggest way and the most powerful way, I would go as far as saying, is really through sharing our stories. And I think there is so much power in that. And I really think that throughout, even if I could relate to some of the personal sharings, and some I couldn't relate to, but it felt very powerful to be able to read the theory of the 9 principles and then be able to relay that back and see how that really impacted, and how perhaps you both were able to really embody that into your lives and continue to embody it, I'm assuming. So I definitely, that was a really turning point for me while reading the book. And I think what we keep speaking about these principles, and I'd love just to read them out for anyone here who may not have had the chance to read through the book yet. So I just want to really name the 9 principles that you and Jillian spent so much time really putting out there for us. I'm just going to open my copy, which already has a bunch of notes in it, by the way. So just to give our viewers some context, so the 9 principles, and I already mentioned the first one, which is, I would say, probably my personal favorite, which is honesty. That's principle 1. And then we have acceptance, courage, trust, humility, peace, love, and then it ends with joy and kindness. And I think just the chronological placement of all of it, when you read it from start to finish, it makes a lot of sense. I think with really the journey of understanding each principle on its own, like I'm not sure if honesty would have really resonated with me the way it did if I read it towards the end and not in the beginning. So that is one of the first notes that I made, and I really wanted to just name that in this conversation. But speaking about these principles, what I'd really love to also ask you, just from your perspective of authoring this book and also being an individual who embodies these 9 principles in your life professionally and personally. And I know we're going to spend a little more time talking about your professional journey with these principles, but I think just really honoring the fact that so much of this book and the journey the reader is on when we are transitioning through the 9 principles is really understanding that this is, and I don't want to minimize it by saying it's a toolkit, but something like that, about really facing and dealing through and with our inner battles. And I think in the post-COVID-19 reality, if we can even call it a post-COVID-19 reality that we are currently living in, when I was reading this book, I was wondering how this would have impacted me if I had read it during the pandemic. And I'd love to just gain some insight or ask you what or which of the 9 principles, if there are any, really held true for you throughout the pandemic, because I think it's very difficult to discuss how we face our internal battles without honoring what we've all been through collectively in the global space with the pandemic. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that. Which of the principles would you say really held true for you?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I think is, before we get to the principles, the book starts with 4 practices for self-care, because, you know, when you rebuild a building, which is what we're talking about, we're rebuilding ourselves as humans. We need a bit of scaffolding, something to make sure that we're safe. So those 4 practices, which, you know, we suggest people start practicing before they start doing the work on the principles, were a real mainstay of my life during the pandemic. And they are, you know, meditating, even for just a tiny period, just allowing that moment when we realize that that we are not in charge. There is something greater and bigger than us, and surrendering our day, our fears, our being to that thing that is not us. So there's meditation, then there's how we speak to ourselves, trying to replace those critical voices with kind, loving voices, not speaking to ourselves as if we were toxic, horrible creatures, but treating ourselves with the love that we would talk to a best friend. And then the third one is taking care of our bodies, remembering that we're human beings and we have physical, we're physical, just like toddlers. If we go without food or exercise or sleep, we're going to become emotionally destabilized. So we're not so sophisticated that we can ignore those really basic needs, and often they can help and ground and root us. And then the other one is gratitude. Gratitude is a mind-altering substance. No matter how bleak we are, if we just start noticing, the good that is there, the flower poking up between the paving stones, the flash of blue sky out of our window, the bird on the wing, the scent of freshly brewed coffee, whatever it is, we have to notice the good, because as humans, we're biologically programmed to be on the lookout for danger. And what we do is we collect all this evidence that it's dangerous, that it's scary out there, and we scare the bejesus out of ourselves. And of course, we no longer please God, many of us, but not all of us by any means. There is still so much unrest, and particularly at this tragic time in the world, we really have to be mindful of those of us who live in a relatively secure setting, what a blessing that is. But to find the blessings that we do have and to focus on them. And when we do, we grow a new muscle, which is the positive muscle, which is the muscle of appreciation, which is really the muscle of self-connection, God consciousness, oneness, whatever you want to call it. That this is about spirituality. It's not about religion. It's about how do we connect spiritually to ourselves and to other beings and to the universe at large. So those 4 practices really held me. And then I think the other one that really held me was joy, because it was such a terrifying time. None of us knew what was going to happen, and many of us experienced direct loss or indirect loss, and it was very easy to project negatively into the future, to not know what was happening. And we can do that even when there isn't a pandemic. The pandemic was really just an opportunity for all our fear and anxiety and negative projection to find justification to really dominate. So I tried to focus on joy of finding one thing a day that was just about beauty or sound, that just connected me to a sense of a greater good. So yeah, I mean, I say in the book that joy is the oxygen that keeps our pilot light aglow, and we ignore it at peril. When we're in a crisis, all we focus on is getting through the crisis, but actually that places us in a very vulnerable position. And if we want resilience, if we want the ability to sustain ourselves during the medium to long term, rather than just the adrenal push to get through the first stage of a crisis, then we need to work in a way that is regenerative and which feeds ourselves so that we can continue to give to others. And joy is a really important practice that is not spoken about enough, that helps to restore us so that we continue to be of use and service to others.
Absolutely. And I love the way that you've put it, service to others. I think there's so much truth in that, and there is also so much power in that. And I want to go back to what you were saying right in the beginning, and thank you for mentioning the practices. I believe the words you used about the way we speak to ourselves, and this idea of language, and I guess this concept and this theory of how important phonetic resonance is. And there's so many scientific experiments. I'm sure we're all well aware of them, of how just speaking to a glass of water, like the water that you just drank, in a loving way versus speaking to a glass of water in a negative way or a hateful way, and the study of those selves, and it shows how really there is so much power in the way that we speak to others and of course to ourselves. And that's actually something that I noticed throughout the book in terms of this, whether it was through your personal stories or Jillian's personal stories, or even just the way that the principles are written. And each principle, again, for our viewers here who haven't read the book yet, each principle comes with a practice. So you are encouraged to have a journal when you start the book, and it's actually very beautiful and very transformative, I think, when you sit through all the work that the book asks you, or rather implores you to do. But I noticed this theme of this constant reiteration of really finding that acceptance to not necessarily always be the perfect version of ourselves. And I think just that for me just really made all of the principles very practical and also very real, rather than an unrealistic expectation and, telling us to be a certain way that may not necessarily be beneficial or even be possible. And I think that is really what kept all of the concepts of the principles and the practice that the questions ask us to really think about and journal about. It really kept it very real for me, I would say, as a reader. And I think just going off of what you said about the way we speak to ourselves and the importance of that, and also really letting go of this idea of perfectionism, whether that's in our personal life or whether that's in our professional life. But I know that that is something that you have mentioned in the book that you struggled with a little, and it has to be mentioned that this is a recurring theme that we're seeing all over the world today, especially, I would say, in the youth and in the younger generation. I think for individuals who are really starting out with their careers, and I see so much on social media about this, and I'd love to just get into that with you, only because there's so much you've shared in the book. And I think some of the people listening in today, and maybe even the younger generation, would really benefit from some of your insights on that. So if you could share just a little bit more in context to your journey about this idea of really letting that perfectionism go, and how and why even that could be of supreme benefit for us.
Sure, absolutely. And, one of the things that we say in the book is that we think the P word, perfect, should be completely, outlawed. No one should even have to think about trying to make themselves perfect or trying to do anything perfectly. And, if I can just step back for a moment and talk culturally about the pressures on women. We come into a global society that is still very, very patriarchal, and that pits woman against woman. If I go for a job interview, I look around the waiting room and I know it's likely to be the other women that I'm really in competition with. Either they want a woman for the job, in which case I'm competing with the other woman. It's very rare that I genuinely feel genderless. And so we're taught to compare ourselves to other women. We're culturally taught to be in competition with other women, look at women's magazines, look at the objects of beauty that we are told to look at and measure ourselves up against. So there are all these cultural pressures on us to somehow conform to a mythical beauty, and even though we know, we're intelligent women, we know when we look at those images that that's not what people really look like, that their makeup has been done perfectly, that the computer image has been perfected. We know that, but it doesn't make any difference, because deep down inside us, we all want to be loved. And how do we get loved? We all want to be loved, and we want to be safe. And so we want to make ourselves as lovable as we can, so that we can be as safe as we can and survive. It's biology, it's not vanity, it's driven by evolutionary pressures, and they collide with the cultural pressures, and we end up in this toxic mess where we spend a ridiculous amount of time worrying about our achievements and our looks. And we see that, you know, you talked about social media, we see that on social media, and there's so much research done about what happens inside our bodies when we look at those images, how they make us feel. So it's really complicated, and it takes, you know, a lot of inner strengthening to resist the invitation to compete and compare. And one of my favorite expressions, which is in the book, is, you know, if we compare, we despair. And it's compare and despair. The moment we start comparing, we are going at some point to wind up in despair. We very rarely compare ourselves with those who are worse off. We usually compare ourselves with those who are best off, so that we come off badly. And it just is not the way to any kind of peace or any kind of happiness. So it's about letting go of comparison and making friends and making peace with who we are. It's you know, society tells us to abandon who we are and become this perfect version of ourselves. Actually, you know, we're messy, women bleed, you know, we have mucus, we have all sorts of things. Anyone who's had a baby knows what a mess it is, how messy we as creatures are. And yet we walk around in our high heels and our beautifully coiffured selves, pretending that we're not really complex, messy creatures. And it's how can we return to a greater level of honesty and free ourselves from the torture that we enact on ourselves because we don't feel that we conform to the idea of perfect or even just good enough.
Absolutely. And I
think
just want, sorry. Oh, please go ahead.
No, there was just one other thing that I was trying to remember and I couldn't, but you just made me remember it, which is, you know, usually when we're comparing our insides, how we feel inside, with how someone else looks outside. So we're not even doing a light comparison. You know, I feel like I'm ugly and overweight, so I compare my inner feelings of distaste for myself, which probably come from childhood trauma or lack of acceptance or many different woundednesses within me. And then I compare how I feel inside with how someone else looks on the outside. And we don't know what other people are feeling inside, no matter what their outsides look like. It's no guarantee of happiness or inner peace.
Absolutely, Jennifer, and thank you so much for I think for putting it the way that you have. There is absolutely no denying that this is definitely its own pandemic. I would say its own emotional pandemic. And again, I keep focusing on the younger generation because there's so much research out there in terms of social media and the usage of that, and just I think this constant notion of body dysmorphia and body image. And unfortunately, I think that is the statistic, or so it seems, is much higher with young women than it is with men. And that's not to minimize the journey that young adults are on and those who identify as male are on. But I do think that as women, this has been a recurring theme throughout the history of time, and it's just very heartbreaking to see it unfold that the way it is as it trickles through to the younger generation. And I do think that there needs to be definitely much more of vocabulary out there for us to be able to pass that on to the younger generation and the future generation about how to deal with this idea of really overcoming the comparison that you speak of, for example. And again, that's why I think that books like this, they're so important, not just for the theory of understanding how to implement these principles into our lives, but also, again, through sharing of stories, through being able to resonate, through personal experiences that women like you and Gillian have been through and that you openly speak of. So again, I must applaud your courage to really be able to put that out there. And speaking of, I think, putting things out there, I think for me personally, the story that I loved the most, and I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think it might be under the principle of humility, where And again, you speak so candidly about the burnout, the professional burnout that led to a personal burnout that you faced in your life. And I think for anybody who's read the book, we see how that is something that was a turning point and perhaps one of your biggest life breakthroughs that led to something more beneficial for you. But I cannot even begin to imagine how difficult that was. And again, the spirit of honesty that you have relayed your experiences of depression and burnout with is something that was very powerful, I think, to read. But just going back to the conversation, I think about perfectionism and the way we speak to ourselves and the way we speak to others as well, in terms of being honest. And I do think it's in the humility principle, where you said that when individuals would ask you what you're doing, for a long time, when you weren't necessarily working because of everything you were going through, you didn't always say that you weren't working, but then you came to a point where you said it straight out. And I think there's a quote in there about how you said, and I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but how you said, I'm not doing anything. And I can only imagine the liberation that came with that, and also perhaps a kind of fear from society. But I think it was just so interesting to get that insight and to read about that. But what I'd love to really just get a little more insight on, because again, for all of those individuals who are watching and who will watch the recording, I think there is a huge concept of burnout that we are seeing across the board, across ages, and it is a very real concept right now. And I'm not sure how much of that has to do with us coming out of the pandemic, or how much of that has to do with individuals working at home and getting back into the workspace physically. There could be a number of reasons, but I do think that burnout is a very real thing, and probably always has been, but only because you speak so candidly about it in the book through all your personal sharings. I'd love to just ask you a little bit more about that journey for you and how you overcame it. And I would also like to say, before you answer that, of course, this is a whole question on its own. So I can only imagine how difficult it would be to summarize that up and articulate it. But if you could, we would be so grateful. And also, if you have any advice for anybody who may be struggling with burnout.
No, it's my pleasure. And, I wish I had known more about it when it happened to me. So I feel evangelical about talking about it. So thank you for giving me that chance. And the first thing is, I didn't know that I was burning out. I did not know. It happened very gradually. Everyone gets stressed. But then it went more from being stressed into kind of physical symptoms, gut issues, low mood, sleeplessness, bits of depression, and just, panic, anxiety, and then really physical symptoms. Like, I remember there was one time I was working on my computer, and I was a television journalist at this point in the newsroom, and I started not to be able to see properly. My vision started to go. And instead of thinking, this is really serious, I'm losing my eyesight, I thought, that's okay, I can touch type, so it won't get in the way of my filing my story. That's how addicted to my work I was. And I was also so frightened of not having it. I was so frightened of not having it for economic reasons. I was a single mother with 2 children by this point, but I was also frightened of not having my work, because it gave me an identity. It told me who I was, what I did. It was something that my calling card, as you said before in a conversation, this is what I do. What do you do? It was an easy way of forming a connection and feeling enough, I guess. And but it got to the stage with me that I woke up one day and I just didn't want to go. I didn't want to go on living. I did not want to go on living. And I thought that was a true feeling. And to anyone, who struggles with that kind of ideation, one of the most helpful things that was said to me as I started to come through that was, if your head is telling you you don't want to be alive, then you're ill, because our job as humans is to survive. So when we turn against ourselves in that way, and so, you know, I couldn't go to work. I just could not go to work. If they had said, you know, your house is on fire, and unless you leave and go to work right now, I wouldn't have moved. There was nothing that could make me move. I was absolutely finished, spent. And when I eventually got to a doctor's surgery and they diagnosed burnout, I was like, what? You know, so the level of denial, you know, it's like addiction. We don't realize it because work is, you know, something that's valued in society, something that we value ourselves. Anyway, but really I had become addicted to my work and used it to plug my holes inside. So what I would say to anyone is to look up the signs of burnout and to recognize when you're getting them, and to introduce self-care into your life. I had no self-care. I thought it was selfish to take care of myself. I was a campaigning journalist, and what I wanted to do was change the world, and to take time off to go for a walk, to breathe, to read a beautiful passage. That was just so selfish, I thought. And I really didn't understand that actually it was necessary, If I wanted to do the things that I wanted to do in this life, I would have to take spaces. I would have to allow the nourishment that I was seeking to give others into my own being.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I do want to acknowledge that I can only begin to imagine how painful it must have been for you. And it's difficult, I think, even to talk about these things, even once we've overcome them. So thank you for sharing so openly and honestly with us. And it's definitely, I think, just reflecting off of what you've said, it's what really calls out to me is not even, and so many individuals like yourself included, it just not being able to recognize that in itself is, for me, I really wonder how much of an impact that has, or that has from society on us, to not really be able to even take the time out to really discern what we're going through because of all of our external pressures, whether that's in our professional lives or whether that's in our personal lives. And I think that is something that it's sad to say, but perhaps that's not going to change from the outer experience. And the only way we can continue to cultivate, I think, a deeper sense of discernment to even understand our own self-awareness and turn that into self-compassion is to really do the work. And I think also just seek out help at the right time. And it's painful. I can only imagine when you don't even know what the right time is to seek out that help. But hopefully anybody who is watching this and is feeling like they may be on that path, they gain some wisdom from what you've shared. So thank you again so much for sharing that. And I think really just relating that back again to the journey of reading the book start to finish with the practices that we're asked to hone down first, including meditation, like you said, and the self-talk, and then going through the 9 principles. I think for me, again, from the perspective of just looking at the principles from a chronological order, the last 2 are joy and kindness, if I'm not mistaken. And I bring that up, tying it into what you've just shared so beautifully and so honestly about your experience with burnout, because what we really see there is a sense of agency to be able to do something. And I absolutely love the way that you and Gillian both have relayed through the last 2 principles of joy and kindness, and especially kindness, about being really a sense of agency and taking our love out into the world, not just for ourselves, but for others and for the causes that we're passionate about, or just for simply existing amongst other human beings, and really deeply cultivating that sense of common humanity like we spoke of earlier. I'd love just to ask you from your writing perspective and your writing hat of why you both chose to place joy and kindness as the last two principles, and perhaps really how that sense of agency relating to joy and kindness was important for the both of you to put out there to your readers.
That's such a great question. And, you know, you talked earlier about how the principles lead you, and those are really our destination points. So the reason they come last is that they're about how we relate to the world outside ourselves. So there are 9 principles, and the first ones really deal with our relationship with ourselves. You know, who are we? Do we have self-authenticity? Do we have self-honesty? Do we have integrity? Even if we have to abandon it regularly because of the world that we live in, do we at least know what our value system is and do our best to give effect to it? Have we cleared away the scar tissue that just backs up as we go through life, as we get hurt, as we get wounded, as we get resentful, as we get wronged? You know, have we cleared out that stuff? Because all of it blocks us up. You know, we're like electrical circuits, and we get clogged up with the silt of pain and life and experience, and unless we clean them off, the energy can't flow. So the first principles are about that relationship with ourselves, moving then to our relationships with those around us. You know, as I said, our resentments are how we handle relationship, how we handle rejection, how we handle love. How do we do all that messy business of relating to other messy humans? And then, as you said, these last 2 principles, joy and kindness, it's what we do when we've made our peace with ourselves and with those around us. You know, why are we here? What is the purpose of this? What should we be doing? As Mary Oliver says, what should we do with this one precious life we've been given? And, you know, for me, and I'm sure for many people on this call, it's unconditional love, it's compassion. You know, that's our goal. So these principles are really about how do we become a channel for that unconditional love and for that compassion. And I was a coward when we wrote this book, because I put the last principle, we called it kindness, because we thought it was easier to understand and it had less I suppose, religious baggage. But what we're really talking about when we use the word kindness and compassion are not interchangeable in normal language, but in terms of this book, they are, because for a long time we were going to call the 9th principle compassion, but it's about what happens when we take love out into the world, what happens when we look at the hurt and pain and harm that is wreaked across our planet and across our world, and what can we do about it? You know, how can we not feel overwhelmed? How can we not feel powerless? How can we get a sense of agency? And how can we use that love as part of our daily practice to try and create positive shifts for those around us? And, you know, joy is hand in hand with that, because that's how we work in a sustainable way. You know, if we're going to be on the front line of trying to heal, trying to reduce suffering, we need to have oxygen going into our lungs. And beauty, wherever you find that, whether it's sound, whether it's nature, whether it's animals, whether it's smell, whether it's touch, whether it's art, doesn't matter what your route to it is, whether it's prayer, whether it's dance, it doesn't matter. Find your route to beauty, to truth, and let that fill you up so that you can go into the world and be that channel of love. So that's why the last 2 principles.
Wow. Absolutely beautiful, Jennifer. I feel like I'm reading your book all over again. I love the way that you put that, and not only because it's so poetic in terms of the way you've used those words, but there's so much truth to that. I think I truly believe that what you've just said, all of it, it really speaks to us activating our own life of human experience. And that is where it all sits. And however we choose to have that experience is, of course, something that we can personally contextualize. But I think that is also why we are here, and really understanding our purpose. And even if that's just our day-to-day purpose, like you said, of just being out in nature and really being able to take the goodness from that back into our lives is so important. And I think especially in the challenging times that we exist in, right now, professionally, politically, globally, geopolitically, there's so much out there to dysregulate us. But I think these words in this book really are a gift to help regulate our nervous systems, and then take that regulation and put it in terms of our emotional context, and then hopefully put that out into the systems that we are interdependently involved in. So I love the way that you answered that. And while you were speaking of that, before I get to asking you our last question, because I do know we're close to time, I just remembered that while I was doing my research after reading the book, I'm not sure where it was that you spoke to this, but I did want to pull this up. I believe, and please correct me if I am mistaken, but I believe that the cover of the book, the circles have a bit of a significant meaning to it in terms of community. And so much of what you were saying right now, it rang that bell. And I'd love for you to share with everybody watching, if that's okay, what the circles really denote before I get to my last question.
Thank you so much for that question. So really what a circle denotes is connection. It involves each of us connecting with others, because there's a lot of research about how vital connection is. Connection actually is one of the biggest determinants of health and life expectancy. The quality of our relationships with others determines our levels of resilience. And, part of the idea of the circle, I have to just say that Gillian actually has a little tattoo of a circle on her hand. And so it speaks to that. The circle is really an image of us joining together as women, joining together as humans, joining together to enable us all to feel safe enough to be who we really are. Because when we're our authentic selves, that's when our lives burn most brightly. And right now, this world needs our light, needs it very badly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for answering that. And I absolutely love the fact that what the both of you chose is a circle, because I think that is in itself so symbolic and so metaphorical, as you just said. And I do want to acknowledge that there is a question in the chat from Donna. So I do want Donna to know that we have read your question and we're definitely going to get to it. I'm actually just going to go ahead and ask Gillian the last question that I have, and then perhaps we can get to Donna's question, only because I think it would be a very beautiful way to end, because Donna's question in itself is so beautiful regarding compassion. But just before we get to that and wrap up, Jennifer, I'd love just to ask you, only because I think everything that you have done in terms of your work has been so diverse. And I know that there are others on this call right now who are probably very interested to know about your journey to setting up the Compassion in Politics think tank, which you are currently very active in. And also if you could tie that in terms of whether or not any of the 9 principles or the practices of this manifesto, this beautiful book that we have here, help to facilitate that decision. So just to hear a little bit more about the work you're doing right now, and then we can get to Donna's question.
Wonderful. Yes. Well, the work that I do right now is together with my fellow co-director, Matt Hawkins, is this organization called Compassion in Politics, and it's directly connected to the book. It comes out of that 9th principle, whether you call it kindness or compassion. How can we bring that into the world, and how can we use it to try to alleviate avoidable suffering? The world, 191 countries across this world have signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's not that we don't know how to solve world hunger. It's not that we don't know what we need to do about climate change. It's that we're not doing it. And we really believe that compassion can be the catalyst to move us from our heads, where we know that's what we need to do, into our hearts so that we can actually start taking the actions that need to happen. And you know, our world has become increasingly polarized. It's become increasingly toxic, particularly the political space, but also across society. We see division, we see the rise of the right, we see frightening forces, we see war in Europe, and now unfortunately, you know, hovering in the Middle East. So our world needs compassion, and it needs, our leaders need to understand that compassion is courageous. You know, for so long it's been dismissed in the same way as women have been dismissed. Well, nice idea, a little bit soft, not very practical. We don't want it in the room when the big decisions are made. No, wrong. That's why we've got into the mess that we're in. If we had leaders that thought about what the next generation are going to inherit, if we had leaders that thought about those of us who are crying out in hunger, crying out in need, our world would be transformed. And you know what? Everyone would be the better for it. All the research shows that the more equal a society, the better the health outcomes, the lower the crime rate, and the greater the happiness levels. We have this knowledge, and yet we don't apply it. We have been hijacked by a system that tells us greed is good and more is the answer. And it's simply not true. And that's what compassion can do. It can bring us back to our moral center and lead us on a journey in the right direction.
Absolutely, absolutely, Jennifer. And I think through the work that you're doing, and I think this, just the presence, simply the presence of this think tank is so important in generally the social fabric that we are all somehow embedded in, and that works from a place for us where I'm not sure if we understand the true meaning of compassion or not. And I just want to say that I think, Donna, your question was, I feel like what Jennifer said really spoke truth to your question. And what, just to read out her question for anybody else listening, she said, Jennifer, do you see us going forward toward compassion as a place we live from in the midst of trauma? Do you feel we are walking globally toward compassion, regardless of what we may see with our own eyes? And I feel like with what you just said, Jennifer, you already answered that. So thank you so much, Donna, for asking. And thank you, Jennifer, for being with us here today and speaking from a place of so much authenticity and honesty and compassionate love. I think it's been a real honor to hear what you have had to say. And I am going to now pass it over to Felipe, who is going to close us out with some important information.
Thank you so much, Anum. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Honestly, if there's one thing that, like, I don't know, maybe this might not be like the best thing to say, but like, down with the patriarchy, like, really, we should, I don't even know where to begin, honestly. Like, yes, thank you. The knowledge that women in any sort of position, their experience is so powerful. And just listen to this and hearing your experiences and seeing how our systems just fully manipulate our behavior, the way that we live. Like, it's just insane. I wish we, and this is happening, but I wish now, because I'm a little impatient, I wish now we had more of a women like influence in all the systems, especially politics and economics. And okay, I need to chill, I'm sorry. Anyways, thank you both so much for being able to be part of this global read. Just to let you know, everybody else, we have our upcoming course, Becoming Creatures of Boundless Love, that is going to be with the Pro-Social World team, Diane Burke, Susan Soleil, and Keishi and Roge. I love all three of them. I've taken pro-social spirituality with them, and it's been like the most incredible experience in which I was able to grow spiritually and feel more connected with my peers. Like, what a beautiful experience. And so this course, Becoming Creatures of Boundless Love, talks about the elements of instant spiritual living that Wayne Teasdale proposed. And so here it says, we have been given the gift of life in this perplexing world to become who we ultimately are. Creatures of boundless love, caring, compassion, and wisdom. And doesn't that ring a bell with what we just heard throughout this webinar? So this course starts on October 16th. It's 4 weeks and $40 for the tuition. You're welcome to sign up on our website. Our EdNet Forum 2023 for October is Compassion It. This is happening on October 19th at 7:30 a.m. Pacific time with Sarah Schreier and Borough Poe, which are people from Compassion It. And they will talk to us about those bracelets that we had at the Parliament of World Religions as well as on our website. Do not forget that the last Saturday of every month, we have our Charter Sangha, which is our Compassion Circle. It's free to register and free to participate. This next one is on October 28th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. And last but not least, our next global read is with our poet, Lynn Strongen, and our facilitator is going to be Daniel Offray. And we're super stoked to have him here, even though it is a global read. It's not specifically dedicated to a book, but more specifically about the author Lynn Strongen and the ways that we can share and develop more about disability and creativity. Once again, thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you so much, Anun. Thank you, everybody else that joined us for this amazing global read. This recording will be available on YouTube in just a couple hours. So if you sign up, you will be receiving an email with this link. Thank you once again, and hope everyone has a great week. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Lovely to be